And so we're going to give it time for people to come in. We have over 200 people registered. Um, so far, we have about 60 in the room, 68 in the room. We're just going to give it a few minutes for people to get in the room and get comfortable. I'm going to throw on some Michael Jackson, Man in the Mirror. I think that's fitting for this moment because oftentimes people don't look at themselves, they look outside themselves for change. Change comes from within. And when we start thinking about ourselves being a change maker, we're more likely to make change. When we look to the next man, it may or may not happen because the next person may not be where you are. They may not have the resources you have. They may not have the ability, the same ability as you. So it's not one person, it's all of us. We need to work together to make this change that we're seeking to see every day. The numbers are still rising, so I'm just going to give it a few more minutes. It's 12:02. I'm guessing we can get started by 12:05.
Yes,
Hope
ma'am.
everyone's doing well this morning. I'm really excited for this conversation. I'm excited for the work that Now on the Front Door is doing. And I also have a few things to say about Now on the Front Door while talking about Now on the Front Door while keeping things the same. And that's a direct plug for my friend, Angela Burton, who went through the process to interview for the commissioner position here in New York City. And after 3 interviews, money spent traveling from Albany, and all of the other things that she contributed to be a change agent for this agency, they decided to go with someone else after purposefully leaking her name to create controversy. But there's no controversy in change, people. The only controversy is the fact that they would entertain someone who has never lied about who they are or what they are about, only to say the controversy around your name makes us back off. What that says to me is you're not really interested in change because anyone who's going to bring change to the agency will have controversy around their name. If there's no controversy, if no one's calling them radical, if no one's calling them out of their mind, then they're not the person for that position because it's going to take a radical person who's out of their mind to change that agency. That agency is buried in concrete misery. So if you really want to make a change, take a look at yourself because change starts with you. It means stop lying about the change you want while keeping things the same. You can't vote for the same thing and continue to do the same thing over and over while continuing to say that you want change because change looks different from what you're currently doing. With that, guys, it's 12:04. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this music off and I am going to invite the panelists to introduce themselves. I'm going to end up turning my camera off, and Dr. Dina Lundy is going to be the facilitator moderator of this panel. But somewhere near the end, I will pop back in. Guys, go ahead and do your thing. Everyone, I just quickly just want to tell you this panel is about true change. Um, the word abolition does not mean to just rip things apart and not have provisions in place. It means not to overuse emergency removals. It means not to invest in the system and not the people or the communities in which the people come from. It means creating change that allows children to be safe, happy, healthy, and thriving at home. The word abolition should not be a scary word. It should represent what we all want for the better of the people. With that, Nina, it's on you.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Narrowing the Front Doors, Supporting Families Without Surveillance. My name is Dina Lundy. I am from Brooklyn, New York, originally Brownsville. I was raised by a historian, and I got into this work in about 2011 when I came in contact with impacted people who were able to tell me their story. And with that, I will send it over to Alan.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Dina. I'm Alan Detloff. I'm a social work professor and a former family policing agent. And that's really the lens that I bring to this work as someone who has been complicit in harming hundreds of families by forcibly separating their children from them, and didn't understand at that time the harm I was causing, but understand that now, which led to a lot of my work in this abolitionist space. Since 2020, I've been involved in an organization called the Up In Movement, which is an abolitionist organization focused on abolishing the family policing system, and that's how I met Joyce and all of the people on this panel. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here with y'all today.
Gannett?
Hello, everyone. My name is Tawadich Gannett Stewart. I go by Gannett, and I am joining you all from the Sunshine State of Florida. I spent, like Alan, I spent many years, 22 years in Florida child welfare system. I came into the system as an investigator, protective investigator with the Department of Children and Families, thinking that I was helping. And in 2020, thanks to Alan, the Up-In Conference, I participated in that. And that was one of the beginning of my abolitionist journey. I've been out of the formal system now for about 4.5 years. I work for a funding agency, we fund nonprofits. I am convinced wholeheartedly that this system cannot be reformed. It must be abolished because it is not grounded in truth. And anything that is not grounded in truth will not be successful. So I'm very happy to be here and looking forward to this discussion. Thank you.
Chester.
Yes, that leaves me. Hi,
That's
my name
you.
is Chester. My name is Chester Jackson. I've been involved in the work since 1990. I like to say I came riding into this work on a white horse, and I had it all figured out. And needless to say, over the years, I have had that much changed. I like to point out that I'm not a professional social worker, so I have a great deal of respect for professional social workers, and I don't want to misrepresent myself. I am an adopted person, though informally adopted as an infant. My work since, like I said, since 1990 has prepared me for really nothing else. I think, in terms of what it's done for me personally, is beyond measure in terms of how I developed as a person. I'm tickled pink to be on this panel with these esteemed folks who, when I first heard the word abolition in this regard, I just kind of smiled and thought about, well, yeah, wouldn't that be nice? And one of the miracles of the last 5 years or so has been that it's become a real possibility and not something that people whisper about or laugh about necessarily anymore. There are actually folks in the world, including these folks, really trying to make that happen. So I'm very excited about that possibility. And that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome. So I think this is a really good opportunity for us to jump right into our questions for the panel. I'm not going to go in order. One of the questions that really speaks to me is, what role does race play in determining which families are labeled at risk, unfit, or in need of intervention? Along with that question, I want you all to maybe speak to the typical makeup of the social work force. So my research indicates that they are typically not of the people that are being surveilled and typically lack cultural understanding for the population that they are policing. As such, I'm going to repeat the question. What role do you think race plays in determining which families are labeled at risk, unfit, or in need of intervention?
I guess I'll jump in. That's a great question. I wanted to share a little bit about my cultural background. My mother is Ethiopian. That's where I get my name from. My father's from Panama City, Florida. I was born and raised in Liberia, West Africa. So when I started as an investigator in the panhandle of Florida, which is not very diverse, because of my background, I understood that multiple ways of parenting. The Ethiopian culture is very non-Westernized, whereas the Liberian culture is very Westernized. It was my period started by the freed slaves with American colonization society. So we bring ourselves to this work, our lens, our biases, our unresolved trauma. We bring this to this work. So when we look at, I see child welfare system in its current form as a direct extension of chattel slavery. When we see how Black bodies were commodified through slavery, we see the same thing. I'm in Florida. I'm sure there are people on call from various states. The disparities are the same regardless of what state you're in. There are those of us of color that are disproportionately represented in these systems, and that's not by happenstance. I would also say that it's not just a simple solution of hiring Black people, because as a Black person that is trained in this system, we also join in contributing to the disparities. So this is something that is very deep, it's entrenched, and it's how we view Black people. So I like to use a metaphor of children coming into this world, they're innocent. I'm sure at some point an innocent white child was looking around and seeing how their lives were different than the Black people out in the fields. Innocent, Black child is looking at their life and how their parents are living in comparison to the whites. And they ask their parents, why is it that we have this lifestyle? And there had to be some explanation or rationalization that that parent gave the child to justify whether or not they were white or not they Black. And that I refer to as a big lie that has been passed down generation by generation, reinforcing for white people, why did Black people deserve to be out there picking cotton while they're in the house? For Black people, why they are out there in the field and being treated that way. So that is the internal work that Joyce mentioned earlier that we have to unlearn, because we have been passed down this lie and these values from our parents who we trust the most. And it's something that has been reinforced generation by generation. This system is operating just as designed. And in order for us to move forward in a system that truly treats everyone as equal, we're going to have to unlearn what has been passed down to us.
Thank you. Alan.
Yeah, I could echo a lot of what Gannett said. I think race has played a role in labeling families as unfit since the era of chattel slavery, where a narrative was created that enslaved parents were unable to care for their children, and if they were to be freed from enslavement, then they wouldn't be able to care for their children because it was their white enslavers who really cared for them. After slavery was abolished, that narrative continued. Formerly enslaved people were labeled as vagrants and homeless, dependent on government assistance, and that idea that they were dependent on government assistance carried forward then into the era of welfare, when Black mothers were viewed as fraudulent and abusing the welfare system. And then that morphed into a narrative of Black families as being impacted by the crack epidemic and crack babies. And what we see over time is that this narrative of Black families being unfit has been around for hundreds of years. It just morphs and takes a different form as different social issues become relevant, but it's the same myth of unfitness that's been around for hundreds of years. In terms of the workforce, I think my experience is that it varies by country. When I was part of the family policing system in Fort Worth, Texas, it was predominantly white, but I know in many places it's predominantly Black. I know in New York City, I believe the majority of the workforce is Black. And I've been asked about that when I talk about racism in the system. Well, how could it be racist if the workforce is predominantly Black, like it is in New York City, some other places? And I always say, it's not about the workforce. There are absolutely individual biases that impact the outcomes that happen in the system, but it's the policies of the system that are racist. So if anyone is doing their job within the system and implementing the policies as they're written, that's going to result in racist outcomes because the policies themselves are racist.
Thank you so much, Alan and Gannett. Chester.
There was so much there. There is so much there. And of course, I agree with all of it. The one piece Gannett really made me think about was the messaging that I've received from my own family and the people that I've loved growing up. And as my life has unfolded, without going into that whole story, I can see where my own colonization work, so to speak, is really evident to me. And when you first read the question, I thought, oh man, we going in hard, right? Question number one, just blow the place up. But when you think about it, the impact of race and racism and all kinds of other isms is so so in the institutionalized, so a part of it that has to be where we start, because there's so many things that we take for granted as professionals that we don't even have to think about anymore. You walk in a house and you see, and you know what you see. Even if you think about the images we get on television from the nightly news, we know who's robbing and killing and doing all the bad stuff. So it's almost impossible to be above that. I mean, you have to really work to see beyond, and then you have to fight the tidal wave of other folks who are like, "What are you talking about? That's crazy." And it is crazy in the sense that we have this flood of what really is, and somebody standing there saying, "But no, it's not that." So you scared me with the question, but I think you're right. It's a fundamental. Before we start anything, we got to go there, and until we can get there and be comfortably there for as long as we need to be there, we're not going to get very far with anything else.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jackson.
Just add, Dr.
Sure.
Lundy, I just want to add to something that Chester said about what we see. One of the challenges is that, we rely on quote unquote standardized assessments, but I would say that nothing is really standardized because we all come to this work, we bring ourselves to this work. And what you see oftentimes, if you have not dealt with your own unresolved trauma, your own biases, you could project that onto a family. So really, we have a situation where people, you have a parent that is being surveilled by someone who could be projecting their own biases and their own unresolved trauma, not only at the investigator level, but also in the court system, people that are doing mental health evaluation, all these assessments. So, and there's no checks for that, right? When you hire someone and put them in these positions of power, you're asking, did they go to school? Did they get a degree? And I don't even know, honestly, how you would ensure that a person is not projecting. But when you see these assessments in statute or in administrative code, they sound standard because they're asking the same question, but they're using words like protective, appropriate, diligent. What exactly does that mean? And when it comes and it gets filtered through your lens, you could project that onto a parent. So it's really this unchecked power. Not only is it just tied to how you view race, it can be values. Families from different cultures have different values of what appropriate parenting is. And who is to say that we all have to align ourselves with white middle class values?
Thank you so much, Gannett. I think that one of the things that we try to get away from as a society is the way in which Black and Brown populations are portrayed in the media. And so if you're inundated with all of that stimuli all day, every day, I think you'd have to search far and wide to find routinely positive images of people that look like us or families that are being surveilled. As such, you would have to really think within, are you, as you say, projecting that onto other families? And I think we don't talk enough about the lack of positive images of the families that these workers will ultimately go into their houses and see what they see, not understand poverty, and make certain decisions, right? I grew up in Albany PJs in Crown Heights, and it was not uncommon for there to be no food in the home, but the neighbor had food. And that was just how we survived. So it's not only that the people that are charged with surveillance might be of color, do they understand the culture of survival as well as poverty? And I think that is what is lacking. And you utilize that against the backdrop of all of the imagery about people that look like those families, and you would not likely come out with positive outcomes. So my next question is, as I just mentioned, that it was not uncommon when I was growing up for the neighbors to feed all the kids, especially in the summer before free lunch came, right? So my question next is, what do you all think meaningful support looks like when it exists outside of agency involvement, and how does that change outcomes for families? Let me know if I need to repeat it. Chester, you want to start that one? Let me go at it one more time. What does meaningful support look like when it exists outside of agency or governmental involvement? And how does it change outcomes for surveilled families?
Okay. I'm going to say something now, and I don't know how backed up it is with data. Please tell me if I'm speaking. In terms of where we've seen that in the work that we do is getting community organizations involved in meeting the concrete needs of the families that come forward. I need a refrigerator, otherwise my family's going to be in trouble. I don't know how I'm going to pay rent for the next 3 months. I just lost my job. I need something that if I have to requisition that from somebody, by the time it comes, it's all too late, right? So that's just not practical. And the ways that I've seen it work when these community groups get involved is, first of all, it's here's the need. And they're not telling the family what the need is. The family saying, I need a refrigerator, and the community groups do what they do. And before you know it, somebody's providing a refrigerator. And there's no back cost. There's no, you don't have to sign this, do that. You need a refrigerator. I have a refrigerator. Here's your refrigerator. So my belief is that if we as a system were better able and willing to connect people with community resources off the bat, it would be a lot more efficient, and they can certainly find resources a lot more not more efficiently than some little group in Coney Island could. And that's just if they put their resources toward connecting, making it easily accessible to these community resources, that could go a long way, I think, of meeting those immediate needs, which are what we find first. And if you're a system that's not asking, what do you need, yours going to fall short. I hope that's
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. And not only does it make a lot of sense, but it also catches the problem before it's out of control, right?
Yes.
Because if you're talking about a refrigerator, I would imagine that food has just been purchased.
Yeah.
Another check is 2 weeks away, and you really need to salvage, those resources. Gannett?
Yes, when I think about meaningful support, it doesn't exist in the system for Black families because this system was not designed or it was not intended to support Black families. So when I think about what does meaningful support look like, I look at what is offered to white parents, particularly those who foster and adopt Black children. So when we look at the financial support, the structural support that foster and adoptive parents get, and we compare that to what birth parents get, I think that tells you everything that you need to know. Structures are in place, right? So we have cash assistance to birth parents has been increasingly reduced and stigmatized. When you look at the out-of-home care payments being made to foster care and maintenance adoption subsidy, they continue to increase. So that in and of itself will tell a story, and that is when white parents parent Black children, they receive money and services. We offer services to birth families and very little money, but they need both, right? So I adopted my son out of the foster care system. I will get paid maintenance adoption subsidy until he turns 18. Once the case was closed, no one's checking on me. Nobody's checking to see how I'm taking care of him, right? So why is guaranteed income such a controversial issue? It already exists. It exists for white people that adopt Black children. It's just not structurally in place. So we have to look at what we say we value as a country and what we truly value as a country. Our policies do not support that we want to keep Black families together. If we did, a Black mom, if I were my adopted son's birth mom, I would not be receiving the level of support that I am receiving now as his adoptive mom. And that's just the truth of the matter. So I would say that if we really want to look at what meaningful support looks like, let's look at what white parents receive when they take in Black children. That would be a great starting point as we're trying to imagine a newly envisioned system that actually can keep Black families together.
Alan, you want to take over?
Yeah, when I think about this question, I think about, what abolition means to me and how I've come to understand it. And to me, a real central tenet of abolitionist thought is the recognition that our lives are fundamentally intertwined, that we're responsible for each other. Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who is someone that I really look up to and have learned a lot from, always says that freedom isn't defined by rugged individualism, which society tends to value, but by what she calls radical dependence, meaning our collective reliance on each other, on shared resources, on the infrastructures we build together. And I think recognizing that isn't weakness. Radical dependence, the idea of that challenges the idea that being self-sufficient is what makes us responsible and what makes us worthy. But U.S. society, as Gannett said, values independence, and it actually exploits the idea of interdependence for profit and for control. And in family policing, that plays out with the narrative that good parents are parents who can independently provide for their children, and families who struggle because of structural conditions of poverty, then they're framed as failing, and that's called neglect. But abolitionist thinking really insists on directly the opposite, that need is part of being human, that interdependence isn't a failure, but it's something that we should celebrate, and that children's safety doesn't come from punishing their families through surveillance and removal. It comes from ensuring that families have what they need. And those things can be supported by the state, but they also come from things like mutual aid and community organizing and shared responsibility for each other. And that's what radical dependence is really about.
Thank you so much, Alan. I have had the displeasure or pleasure of sitting on a couple of boards, not-for-profit boards, who indicated that their work was to support adults who emerge from foster care, either with housing, education, or a number of different efforts, as they tend to still suffer with either housing insecurity or food insecurity. And what I found is that the salaries of the people in these not-for-profits tipped around $150,000, $160,000. I will never forget, I was so excited to join my first board actually in New Jersey. I was just so excited. I was the only person of color on the board. And I had been required to sign a number of NDAs. And I went to my first retreat, and I found out that what was on vote that day was a $10,000 raise for the already $150,000 paid director. And I left, when it was over, and I went to my favorite Thai restaurant, and I called my mentor in social services, and I burst into tears. My question with that backdrop of a story is, what lessons can be learned from people with lived experience as they are navigating or resisting these systems? I happen to have a couple of friends that have lived experience and have valiantly tried to start their own not-for-profits. And it is most difficult. I think that the problem lies in a lack of social capital. But I want to get you all's viewpoint. Gannett, what do you think about that?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts about that because, as I mentioned earlier, I'm currently working for an agency and we are a funder. So I've been working for this organization for about 4.5 years. So I'm learning about how things work on the community side, who gets the money, how they get the money, and how that works. I can tell you that you have nonprofits that benefit from the community, and you have nonprofits that benefit the community. And part of the challenge with the nonprofit structure is that your executive director reports to the board of directors, Oftentimes, the board of directors they could be recruited due to their fundraising capability and other reasons, and not necessarily because they are a reflection of the community. So unlike the for-profit world, where you would go out of business if you don't meet the needs of your consumer,
Come on.
non-profit world, you could still thrive in business and still not meet the needs of the consumer because your funder is not consumer driven. So structurally, it's like, okay, what are we doing here? Ideally, your board is a reflection of the community, because I had a conversation with someone. I said, who does the executive director report to? Is it to the community or is it to the board? Now, if your board is reflective of the community that you serve, then you won't have that much of a disparity there. But we know that oftentimes the board members are not a reflection. The executive director is there to support. So I'm tying it back to slavery. Here in Hillsborough County, we have what we refer to as our hotspots. And I would argue that probably every county has them. High areas of concentrated poverty, people who look like us living there, where you have your high child removal, high mass incarceration, gun violence, all the things. And you think about all of the nonprofits and systems, all the funding that goes into these communities. And you think about outcomes, and are these communities improving? At some point, from a funder perspective, we're going to have to start having some honest conversations about, are we funding what community truly needs? Or are we funding what nonprofit is saying that they need? So there are some structural issues in the nonprofit structure that can be problematic, because they can choose someone with lived experience. They can scream rooftop and say, this is what I need. The nonprofit doesn't have to listen to that individual who knows what's needed if the funder doesn't drive that, right? So that's where I'm hoping in my role, that, as I'm educating myself on that we can help close the gap. And as a funder, because ultimately nonprofits are going to do what they're getting paid to do. And if there are opportunities for funders to be able to reinforce the work that is needed by the community. I hope that answers your question.
It did. It definitely did help me understand some more. Of course, having been on the board, I do understand that the director answers to the board and not really to anybody else. And like I said, I sat in my car and cried for 2 hours, called my mentor. So thank you for unpacking that for me, for us. Alan, your thoughts on that? What barriers, I apologize, what lessons can be learned from people with lived experience navigating or resisting these systems when they want to start their own not-for-profits and are being impeded by the inability to connect to systems that can provide them dollars?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, I would echo much of what Gannett said. But as Gannett was talking, I thought of another angle of this question that I think is important, because I saw Joyce mention in the chat, where are the elected officials? And I think that this is something that I've noticed over the years that I've been involved in this work, and really just in the years that I've been in academia, is the extent to which academic voices are valued, often over voices of people with lived experience, because there's some assumption that having a degree or years of schooling provides some expertise in something, when I would say to anyone listening that it doesn't. Everything that I know about this system comes from my experience in the system, my complicity and harm, and then all of the time I've spent listening to people who with lived experience in the system, people like Joyce, who have been a mentor for me for many years. But I think the problem is, in addition to funders not valuing that, a problem is that elected officials don't often value voices of people with lived experience. Elected officials will take something like an academic paper written by an academic as evidence for why a policy should be changed or passed, over testimony by people with lived experience. And I think that's what really needs to change, at that elected official level, the voices of people with lived experience is often discounted. And I think that's a real barrier to people with lived experience bringing about the change that is necessary.
In addition, Alan, in the space that we work in, right, academia, to be doing work in the community, to join a not-for-profit board, to do a fundraising, to feed kids in the summer, that frankly does not lead
Not
to
valued at
tenure.
all.
It does not lead to tenure, and you're really making impactful change. But we need to publish, or we could literally lose our jobs, right?
Yeah.
So that's another place where it's problematic that we talk a lot about our PhDs, because we're actually obtaining all of the information of value from those who have lived experience, right? So
Absolutely.
there's sort of this like double-edged sword. Like I don't want to say credit, but because in my community I want to do what I want to do. I want to be impactful. But the fact of the matter is that I can't put that on my dossier, right?
Yeah,
So
there's so much academic work that actually doesn't lead to any change at all, but that's often what's valued within academic institutions.
exactly. Chester, did you want to jump in here?
Just very quickly, I don't have the inner workings of nonprofits and all that good stuff, but the thing that stands out for me is I hate to see when organizations talk about how they value the voices of lived experience, but still they keep them as pets, where they get to say this and they get to say that. When they want a color commentary, then they'll go to the lived experience person. When the reality of it, I think all of this that we've been talking about so far takes us back to question number one, is that until we're open and until we're ready, and by ready I mean open to the fact that if my child doesn't deserve this, then nobody's child deserves it. Until we get to the place where we're fighting for everybody's children in the same way we would fight for ours, everything else is going to be status quo and window dressing. I still think, I like to think that the organization I work for right now, we value the voices of lived experience. And in previous organizations, we certainly said that and did value that. But one of the things that I know, and this could be just because of my own sensitivity to being conscious of when I feel like I'm being treated like a pet, is it's always taken to a point. And because of my lived experience, I'm going to be more passionate about some things than others. And that passion gets used against me to put me back in my cage, to say, oh, okay, you're a little too precocious here. Get off the couch, get back, and many times not by malicious folks, just by the fact that it is so pernicious that if you have lived experience and I'm the professional, my opinion counts. Sure, I want to hear what you have to say until it gets to be problematic in terms of what my demands are, what my needs are, and I guess any structure is like that to a point. So
Well,
yeah, talk is
Chester,
good, but yes, ma'am.
So Chester, that makes me want to ask you with the scenario and the hypothesis that you just presented. I always talk about the monetization of Black and brown bodies, because if we solve these problems, who will have these jobs, right? So do you think that that person is really saying to you, that professional is really saying to you, if you solve this problem that we're talking about because you have the lived experience and you can navigate it in a way that no one else can, then would you be essentially getting rid of their job? And that is what they don't want.
Well, I'm sure in some cases that might be, in many cases probably, but in my case, I've never wanted their job. But what I did want was to be heard in a way that was meaningful. It feels good to me to be heard and everybody's looking and feeling good, and that's good. But I'd also like to see that turn into action. So yes, to answer your question, it could mean that. But I have a lot of faith in competent, people and even systems. They will figure out a way for them to get what they need. If it serves them to do good, then they will do good. if it doesn't serve them, then obviously there's no need to. There's no reason to. So I'm not worried about people losing jobs. There's always going to be jobs, especially in this field, because what we're talking about is such a radical shift that it's going to be spilling over into everything else. You know, this relationship, meaning that I care about you and I care about what you're doing fundamentally at the core of it. So I don't think that's going to cost us jobs. I think we're going to be redirecting some jobs for sure. And I think that's good.
Chester, that is an excellent segue into my next question. What are some of the dominant myths, in your opinion, about social work as a helping profession, and how does that narrative of help obscure the harm that is occurring? Anyone can jump in there.
I'm going to mull it over.
Okay, yeah, please do. So let me repeat. What are some of the dominant myths about social work as a helping profession, and how does that narrative obscure the real harm that is being experienced by the voiceless families?
So the system, as I mentioned earlier, is not grounded in truth. And I could probably spend an hour telling you about all the lies and myths that drive the system. But I think just the term help, and those of us who came into this, we believe we were helping. But there's a lot of help that doesn't feel helpful to the person who is receiving it. And when you look at structural racism, it is about power. And who has the power to label what is helpful, in spite of the person who's receiving it saying, "Oh my goodness, this doesn't sound very, helpful to me." People reach out for help. They may call the abuse hotline because they need food, and as a result, they lose their child. Right? How is that helping them when we could just giving them food? So I think the fact that it's helpful is a myth in and of itself. If the person receiving the help believes that it's helpful, and I would believe then at that point that it's helpful. But in this system, there's a couple of very strong narratives. One is that the system is saving children. And by physically removing a child from one address to another, somehow that is keeping the child safe. That is not true. All you're doing is swapping one set of risks for another. So there are risks for children to be living at home, and there are risks for children living in a foster home. Because guess what? Foster parents, people too, they've just gone through a couple weeks of training. They have the same challenges, the same dysfunctional childhood. Like, they're not like some super parents that have been isolated from all things, right? All of us are connected, to Alan's point earlier. All of us are connected. We deal with substance abuse, domestic violence, all the things that families we surveil deal with. We all deal with it. There's no family that is untouched by just a myriad of challenges. What we do know is that separating a child from the primary caregiver is the single most dramatic thing that you can do. And it causes harm, even if it's for a short period of time. It causes harm 100% of the time. So what we are doing is swapping addresses, right? We're causing harm 100% of the time, and then wondering why our children are not thriving in the system. So it is a myth that changing a physical address or removing a child from one home to another. The other thing that I like to share that makes people feel very disturbed at times, and it's not anything that I take lightly to say, but children die in foster care too. And children die and they're harmed in foster care for the same reasons that they're harmed and they die in custody of their parents. The only difference is that when a child dies in the system covers for itself. They can say, "Oh, there's confidentiality, everybody's kind of huddled up. What can we share? Where's our risk? Where's our liability?" When harm happens to the parent does not have that cover. So this is it's a narrative that if anybody has any tricks and tips on how to break it, because it is so strong to the point when you suggest abolition, people get distraught because they're really thinking that the system is saving children, but it's not.
So I just want to pipe in right here. Years ago, my mentor, Mr. Brian Lee, told me the social work was not for us. And I had the opportunity to help a really close family member. I want to say it was 2011. And so I started showing up to court with her in that beautiful courtroom in New York City. Family court is absolutely stunning, which is problematic in and of itself. And I promise you that you never want to be in that courtroom when a child realizes that they are not going home. The wails you will never forget. With that being said, helping out that family member, I would drive her to all of the appointments that were necessary. And let me just interject, as a researcher, I really should not be being anecdotal, but I am. And I'm just going to say this: New York City has 5 boroughs. My family member had an appointment in every borough on a particular day that she had to meet these requirements in order to get her kids back. I have a car. We did not make every appointment. So, Alan, I'm going to let you take over here when we're talking about social work as a helping profession that doesn't highlight the fact that there are oftentimes 6 and 7 appointments that these mothers and fathers have to undergo in a day, and they already don't even have car fare.
Yeah, I think one of the examples that I often give is that I saw many times in my own practice is think about the young single mother who has to make a choice between going to work and leaving her young child at home, or staying home with her child because she can't afford childcare, and then being fired from her job, which she needs to pay for rent and food. If that mother makes the choice to go to work so she can continue getting income, and then someone discovers that her child is home alone and calls the Child Protective Services hotline, in many cases that child will be removed. Ask yourself, what does that mother really need? She needs childcare. Does the child welfare system have any resources to provide childcare? No, they have none. They have no ability to provide the actual material resources that that mother needs. So taking that child away from that mother is not helpful at all, but that's what the system does. And the system also has, as you said, Dr. Lundy, the system has no empathy toward understanding the struggles that many families are dealing with, and the burdens that they have to overcome to meet the requirements of these systems. I've seen many times where caseworkers are setting up appointments for families. They're all during the day, and that family will say, I can't take that much time off of work. And I've heard the caseworker say, well, this is about your child. That needs to be your priority. You need to figure it out. And that's the attitude that child welfare workers have. So that's part of what we need to address. And then I want to address one other thing that Gannett said that it reminded me. I think we need to acknowledge that the myth of social work and the child welfare system being helpful comes from white institutions, primarily white academic institutions that indoctrinate students into thinking that this is a helpful profession. When if you really look back into the history of this profession, it's not founded on an idea of help. It's founded in an idea of managing and controlling the behaviors of poor people so that they weren't interfering and becoming a nuisance to the elites in society. But if we really want to address the problem of social work being called a helping profession, we need to address the white institutions that are perpetuating this myth and making students think that this is helpful, and making students think that they're going to be able to help people by becoming a social worker.
So, Alan, I want to just ask you before I move on to my next question. Do you think that what you just mentioned about, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed recent graduates, I have 2 that have TA'd for me a couple of semesters, and they're about to start MSW programs. But what I find when I'm talking with people that have lived experience, and one that I'm working with right now, there's constant turnover of social workers because their tenure is very short, because they get into the profession and they realize, whoa, this is not what I had in mind regarding true help.
Yeah, I think that's a horrible problem in the profession. And I experienced the same thing just having students go through classes of mine where I try to present what I think is the truth about social work. And I should say not just what I think, what is the evidence of social work being very harmful to many people. And then students don't want to go into the profession or ask me, what should I do? How can I be a social worker that doesn't cause harm? I don't know the solution to that other than because I think there are fewer of us who tell students the truth about social work than people who misrepresent what the profession is about. And I think that's what leads to the turnover that we see in social work, because people go into these systems and see that what the system is doing is not at all what I got into this profession for. And no matter how much help one individual can provide to the clients on their caseload, is never going to balance out the harm that the overall system is doing. So I think until we really start addressing that at the educational school level, I think we're going to continue to see that burnout. And I think we're going to continue to see, systems harmed by that, or communities harmed by that.
So Alan.
Yeah. Can I just jump in there? I want to echo
Please.
Yes,
Alan
please.
said. And, the public, they do not understand how extremely violent this system is. And I did a presentation with a colleague of mine, and she used the term violent politeness. And it made me instantaneously think about our meetings that we go to. We sanitize.
Gannett, I'm
Excuse
sorry.
me?
I'm sorry. Violent, what was that second word?
Politeness.
I'm sorry. Okay.
She talked violent politeness. Sorry, I think the internet is a little glitchy. But it took me instantaneously to some of these child welfare meetings where we sanitize language, right? We say, oh, child, we have these charts. But I was an investigator, and I know what it's like to separate a child from the parent. There is no more violent act than that. Keep in mind, I'm a stranger to that child, right? So now I'm putting a child in my car. The child doesn't know me from a hole in the wall. And if the child is going to a foster home, oftentimes I couldn't even tell the child where I was taking them. This is an extremely violent system. The act of family separation is violent. Social workers that are actually trying to be voices to support parents, the retaliation is real. They get treated. Sometimes you feel like you're in an emotionally abusive relationship with your organization if you're actually trying to be a voice and do right by people. But this is an extremely violent system, and it is very harmful to those who are in it that truly want to see children do well, and to the families that get impacted by it.
Gannett, in 1947, Harlow and Harlow did a research study that has prevailed to this day, where they hypothesized the bond between mother and child. And was it anything tangible, or was it the psychological investment? Was it the warmth? Was it the understanding of protection? And that there was no replacement for psychological investment, warmth, and feeling protected. And while I am not saying that tangible things don't matter, but I know I don't remember what I ate at 3 and 4 years old, but I remember that there was no doubt in my mind that my mother and father would kill for me, and my father couldn't read or write. So really amazing point that you made there. Getting emotional, need a moment. I'm back. I was getting emotional. Okay, so if we could, it's sort of like along the lines of the question that was just answered. But I'm going to ask it anyway. How do power, in your opinion, how do power, surveillance, and coercion operate within the traditional helping profession of social work? So I feel like that's sort of another sort of lane, but power, surveillance, and coercion. You just mentioned it when you talked about polite violence, right?
Yeah.
Can you expound upon that a little?
Yeah, I mean, so you knock on a parent's door as a representative of the government, and they know that you have the power to walk out with a child that they birthed. That's a lot of power. And then, you ask all these questions, and they know that you could walk out with your child. And then we say, oh, they voluntarily, they agree to service. They'll agree to anything to not lose their child, right? So, what the frustration I have here in our state, and I'm sure this is probably in other states, is that parents have rights by statute. They have a right to refuse services if the services are not beneficial to them. They have a right to exercise, to say, I don't want to talk to you. But when they try to exercise those rights, they get retaliated against because the system has unchecked power. That agent of government can say, parent refuse services, regardless if the parent had a legitimate reason. Maybe it's a service provider that they've used for that served them no benefit, right? Or to Alan's point, maybe they need to be working and they don't have time to take a bus and go across town. So the system is highly coercive, but we play these games and we gaslight parents and we lie in court when we say they volunteered to do this or they signed a safety plan and they agreed to do this, when in fact they know that you have that carrot dangling over their head that you could walk out with a child. So it's an extremely coercive system. And any parent that has dared to tell the system no knows exactly how coercive it can be.
Alan?
I'm sure Gannett has seen this, but I think the worst thing that a parent can be called in child welfare is uncooperative. That's like the nail in the coffin of a child welfare case that leads to termination of their parental rights. Because one of the main indicators that child welfare workers use to determine if parents are worthy of having their kids is how compliant they are with everything that the caseworker says that they need to do. And without recognizing any of the structural barriers like we've talked about, if the parent isn't able to do that, and oh my goodness, if the parent is angry about any of the things that are being recommended that they do, they'll be labeled hostile, they'll be labeled uncooperative, and that will follow that parent throughout the life of their case. And that just shows how powerful and how coercive the system is. If people don't do exactly what the system says, what the caseworker says, then that's the evidence that's used ultimately to build a determination case. But I also wanted to mention just briefly, that this isn't just the child welfare system. This is social work broadly. I mean, today, beyond the system, there are thousands of social workers working on things called community response teams or other names, where social workers are walking into the most impoverished, structurally neglected communities, arm in arm with the police, the very people who are responsible for brutalizing and terrorizing those communities. And they're framing that as help. So there are social workers who are exercising power and coercion in multiple types of what we call social work, well beyond just child welfare.
Yeah, Alan, a few years, 3 years ago, I did a presentation for one of our local legal associations. We were talking about preventive legal advocacy. And when we pulled the data, number one maltreatment for Black children being removed in Hillsborough County for like a year was threatened harm. And I pulled up DCF's definition of threatened harm. I'm like, according to DCF's own definition, nothing has really even happened yet. And there was a judge that was in there, and he said at the shelter hearings, he hears family refuse to cooperate, which a light bulb went off him, because I was thinking, where are we getting all of these threatened harm cases? And I said, wow, that's fascinating, because guess who doesn't cooperate? Rich white people. They don't like nobody's swinging the door open saying DCF come in. They will tell you who their attorney is and maybe let you see the child, right? So that's where the double standard is of this system and how Black families get treated differently, because it's almost like, how dare you, Black parent, refuse to cooperate? But when you're an investigator and you drive up to a home, you're making assessments. This is where our own life experiences come in. If you go into a gated subdivision, and if that's a really nice, beautiful home, you're going to make assessments about whether or not this person is going to be able to hire an attorney, whether or not they know their rights, if they're going to exercise their rights. If you don't dot your I's and cross your T's, are they going to call the legislator that they donated to, and you're going to get called into the principal's office. So that's the double standard, because wealthy white people who could be potentially abusing their children, they're definitely not cooperating. They know their rights and they're not giving you anything. They know exactly, and PIs fall in line. Investigators fall in line and do exactly what they're supposed to do. So
Absolutely.
that's the hypocrisy of this
People on this
system,
call,
right?
if people on this call could see the difference, how a caseworker responds when a parent hires an attorney, when they have a private attorney, oh my goodness, they get anything they want. They basically bow down to those people and do anything they want because they have an attorney. It's an entirely different situation.
Well, it's based on the level of respect. It's based on the level of respect as a consequence of all the stimuli that you see, that they are probably not doing anything wrong, because you would search far and wide to find families living in poverty that you haven't made broader decisions about. It's just a lack of tangible goods rather than actual abuse. So I think that it's a consequence of just the stimuli that we're always seeing, that white is sort of right and harmless, and also they have the resources to fight back, and that you can really exercise power in the poorer of communities. And dare I say, there is the ability to exercise the ability to form jobs for the future, right? Because it's a pipeline. I'm actually at work on a study on the foster care to prison pipeline. And the fact of the matter is that 75% of people that were in foster care, when I was doing my research in Connecticut, 83% of the men in Connecticut said they had foster care experience at some time or another. That is an indication that foster care is failing, when 83% of the population in Connecticut in jail say that they were in foster care. That is not a success. Chester?
Wow. That certainly makes it clear why the term abolition keeps popping up, because you're talking about something that is going to have to change on so many levels, including culturally. And when I say culture, I'm talking about just the things that we accept as the truth. That I don't know how. Well, I guess the how is going to be when the will is there, and I still haven't lost faith in that possibility. But we do have to figure out a way getting to the idea of narrowing the front door. For me, it's just overwhelming to think about how all the coercion just growing up a black man in America, and miraculously I had very little police contact, and when it did happen, it was my brother's fault. But but I know that to be true. That so much of it is a foregone conclusion. By the time they ring the bell, and they're listening and things are going on, and and I've never been in that position, but I can imagine that folks who see this kind of thing every day, like cops, all these people who deal with frontline stuff, like we talked about earlier, it's impossible not to have that impact how you relate to those people, whoever those people are. I mean, what Dr. Detlef was saying about the social work profession. When I think about the social workers outside of child welfare that I've dealt with, there is kind of an air of you're the professional and I'm not. Like doctors. You deal with a doctor or any person that has a special kind of knowledge. And my mother raised me to be respectful of those who are in positions to know better. So I can't say I disagree with anything that was said. I wish I keep coming back to this idea of cultural change, and what I mean by that is people understanding that it's in our best interest to want the best for everyone, no matter what's happening. And again, we're talking about the horrific murders on the streets and the tenements and all this kind of stuff. But the huge number of cases that are coming forward are not about that. They're about concrete life things. I don't have this, I don't have that, I gotta work. Certainly I would probably should have been in foster care based on the parameters, because my mother was at work 9 to 6. And when I wasn't in school, I was at home with my brother, him trying to get me in trouble, you know. And there are several incidents that I can point to in my life that had I been a foster child, I for sure would have been removed at the very least, institutionalized in several cases for sure. You know, so much of it just seems like such a like the 83% of men in prison having this. I mean, how do we ignore that? How do we ignore that data? I mean, can it be unrelated? I mean,
I don't have the answer. However, I agree with you, Chester. My mother worked 2 full-time jobs, and we were often home alone.
Yeah.
And good thing it was the 70s.
Yeah.
You know, because things could have been very different. The 70s, along with, frankly, pure luck.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reason why I didn't grow up in foster care. Luck. My next question for the panel is, how does abolitionist social work challenge the idea that families need systems, meaning governmental intervention, to thrive? I'm going to let Jeanette start there. Jeanette.
I'm laughing because, I'm pretty convinced that families would be much better off if we just gave them a fraction of what we pay all these systems and just give it straight to the families. I wish all families had the dignity of choice, where they could decide what was best for their family and not be force-fed to participate in anything. I think that would be the great equalizer. If your system is so great and your services are so great, people choose you, just like how I choose where I want to eat, who I want to go to for therapy, who I want to go to for the doctor. I exercise choice on what's best for my son. But we rob our Black families of that, those that are overly surveilled. We take that dignity of choice away from them, and we force them to receive whatever the service is or whatever the system has to offer. But I'm going to dream a little bit. In an abolition society, we treat all families equal and allow them to choose, and that would force a level of it would be the great equalizer, and it would allow the systems that are truly beneficial to the families will partake, and those that are not as beneficial to the families would go by the wayside, just like other industries that rely on for-profit consumers.
Gannett, that your comment really makes me think about, when I've accompanied close friends to their different hearings, and the powers that be say they're angry or not behaving or not compliant, and or the child is a behavior problem after the meeting, and they're like, oh, it's the parents' fault, and so maybe there's too many visits. And yeah, I'm a psychology professor, but I'm not understanding how it is that people don't understand that that child just saw their parents and they want to go home with their parents. And I'm not sure why you don't get that they're not behaving for the next 3 days because they want to go home with their parents, right? So, being required to jump through all of these hoops, in the 5 boroughs of New York is what I have seen. I'm wondering, Alan, if you could also piggyback off of that, and what you think about the ways in which families are required to do these things or force being labeled, and subsequently losing parental rights, which is, what you really don't want.
I think it goes back to the ideas that, it was just sharing, that how much support can be provided by other people within communities that help each other. And I think it goes back to thinking about how many families, particularly Black families, survived in the decades that followed the abolition of slavery before any government systems were made available to them. Because in the decades that followed abolition or the 13th Amendment, All of the government systems that were created to help and support people, even when welfare first started, welfare began as a system for white mothers whose husbands or partners were not able to enter the workforce because of either death or incapacitation. Welfare was meant so those white mothers could stay at home and take care of their children and not have to enter the workforce. And that welfare wasn't available to Black mothers. But despite all of those systems, those government systems not being available to Black families and communities got together and took care of each other. And that's how they survived outside of systems. And that's what abolition looks like. It's people looking out for each other and providing for each other's needs when those systems aren't available for them.
So, Alan, you just answered my next question, which is amazing. And I would love for anyone else who has something to add to jump in, because I myself want to just speak plainly regarding what does abolitionist social work mean in practice, not a theory, not a framework, not within anything that came out of a peer-reviewed article. Let's just explain what that looks like. Alan just did a lot of that heavy lifting. Does anybody want to jump in?
Yeah, I totally agree with Alan. I believe it's when we truly believe that all of us are equal and there's not that double standard. It's, and what I like to remind people is that if you are imposing something on someone else that you will not tolerate yourself for your own child, what is it that you believe about that other person that makes you think that that person needs that, right? Many of us who are on the system side not want someone coming to our house and asking us a whole bunch of questions about decisions that we have made about our child. So what makes us think that there are families that need that? That's that inner work that's needed for us to really dig deep and challenge what has been passed down to us, especially my white colleagues that are in this field, what your parents, grandparents have instilled in you about Black people. We gotta do a reset and really challenge and treat each other as if we are all equal value. We know that God created us all of equal value. And we claim to be a Christian nation. In our money, it says, "In God we trust." We trust God in all things. Why are we not supporting the families that He has gifted these children to? Psalm says that children are gifts. But we're basically telling God, "Nope, you got this wrong. So we're going to pluck this child out of this family and give them a whole new family." But at some point, we really need to look at treating each other as equals.
I'm going to really start with the last thing that you said, and I'm going to ask Chester for some input as we are approaching having about 20 more minutes left. Chester, what does it look like to truly celebrate abolitionist social workers rather than marginalize or punish them, or indeed cause them to leave the profession because of the way that they think about showing up for families?
Yeah. I guess from the institutional standpoint or from the organizational standpoint, organizations have to start appreciating innovation, creativity, and all those things that make those folks who operate within a system do things that systematically may not apply or be appropriate or whatever, as long as the outcome is the desired outcome. I think about what Gannett was saying about the idea of valuing each family because of their inherent worth and all of that. I think a part of what needs to happen is also to blow up the myth that there is a perfect family, that there's a family somewhere who, no matter what life throws them, they're making grape juice and orange juice. No, that's not the reality. All families struggle. All families deal with whatever they deal with, sometimes appropriately, sometimes inappropriately. And for the grace of God or good luck or just living in the right neighborhood or having the right last name, you avoid the pitfalls that families that don't have those advantages still have. And I think at the core of it is, if a new family is better, or a new life even is better. This is a new life, which is another lie that adopted people in particular are sold. That all of a sudden, because there was some legal shenanigans, none of that matters. I think a part of that has to be this myth that there is an ideal family somewhere, and we're all striving for that. And the reality is there isn't. There isn't any ideal family. We all have trials and tribulations, and we need people to give us a hand up. We need institutions that are willing to give us a hand up as well. I don't know if that's anywhere near the question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As an individualistic society, I wonder if the panel could speak a little bit about some concrete actions that participants here today that may not be social workers might do to support families as well as abolitionist social workers beyond the system. Like, what can you do to show up for your neighbor and support your neighbor, or for that matter, that individual that is going into social work and has an abolitionist mindset?
If I could just throw in real quickly,
Please.
The only thing I have, I think, to offer folks is the ability to listen and the ability to try to be there with them in that moment. Most of the folks that I deal with who call me for whatever reason, it's amazing how powerful it is when, one, they get a human being, and two, they get somebody who doesn't have the answers. I'm not just do this, just do that, just listening. And I think if more of us practice this idea of listening and being in it with them, not trying to get them over it, it's going to be better, it's going to be okay, just being in it with them, in the despair, in the moment, because big things in life, we figure out what to do. It's the little things that make us crazy. It's the big things in life. Oh, I got to do this, I got to do that. So we don't always have to have the answer, I think. And being willing, anybody can listen and truly listen, not just be sitting there looking at them or on the phone,
I think that's tremendously powerful.
Yeah, and I agree. I think, being willing to grow and learn and sit in the truth. For those of us that came to this field thinking that we were helping, we have to come to terms with the fact that we're causing harm. That may not have been your intention. It's a painful journey, but we have to be willing to grow and learn. When you have this level of responsibility and power, it's not like we're swiping widgets at a retail store somewhere. We have power over people's lives. And with that power comes responsibility. So, sit with it, try not to be defensive, and listen, like what Chester said. The last thing that I want to say as far as a concrete step is that those of us who are systems people, I want to challenge us to come out and start speaking about the harm that we've witnessed and the harm that we've caused. Because we need to support. Parents have been vocal. They've been screaming on the rooftops about how they've been harmed by the system. We as system people, more of us need to come forward and support what these parents are saying and acknowledge and say, yes, I was a part of the system. I caused harm. Because that hits differently when people hear it, because there's still this narrative out there. When a parent speaks, people still have that doubt because they believe there's no way DCF would take this person's child without being some legitimate reason. But with me as a systems person saying, yeah, I work for DCF, I was an investigator, and yes, we were taking children willy-nilly. This is the harm that I caused. That hits a little bit differently. So I want to encourage any of the system people that are on here to start speaking your truth and support what is being said by the parents who have been harmed by the system and children that have been harmed.
And if I could just offer something really concrete in answer to this question before we move on to questions. Many of you probably know Victoria Copeland or have read the work of Victoria Copeland. Victoria is the person who actually conceptualized the term family policing system for the first time and got that into kind of mainstream knowledge. And Victoria has been very ill from long COVID and related illnesses since 2021. So a way to support an abolitionist social worker who's made a huge difference in this work would be to support Victoria because she's entirely dependent on donations now for her medical care. So I wanted to put her GoFundMe link in the chat. as a way to support an abolitionist social worker.
Thanks, Alan. And JMAC, as an organization, has donated to Victoria Copeland. I know her work very well. My very first fundraiser, 6 years ago, Victoria flew in from California and was very supportive. And it's just really sinful that everyone in this country can't get the care that they need, regardless to what system that care should come from. And for Victoria, it is the healthcare system. She is almost paralyzed basically from the neck down, paraplegic state. And she can't even get a full-time nurse without donations. So that tells you where this country is on helping people. I just want to jump in really quick because our time is almost up. It's 1:21. You guys were amazing. The chat was going off. I appreciate everyone who attended this panel today to hear from these amazing social workers and other, Chester. Um, I would like to quickly say that systems shouldn't have the right to reconfigure families for reasons related to poverty. We talk about protecting children all the time, and I always say, and I'm going to continue to say it, because the one thing I learned from the system is to keep saying the same thing over and over. The only thing they protect children from is success. Look at the outcomes, but yet everyone stands 10 toes down that works within these systems on patting themselves on the back, saying that they're doing a good job because they're doing what they were told to do. A good job means being a critical thinker and ensuring the help that you give actually helps. Help isn't help if it doesn't help. And I want to make that clear. The people who I believe we should be challenging is elected officials. And the reason why I choose elected officials is because they're responsible to uphold the law. And I'm angered. I'm very angry, right? You can call me the angry Black woman. It doesn't matter. I am angry that Miranda has not passed. Families should know their rights from the moment CPS agents knock. The reason they don't want you to know your rights is because they want to come in and collect enough information so that they can then try to find a reason that they can exaggerate to remove your child and reconfigure that home while paying someone else to care for your child and alienating that child from you, creating mental health and starting them on a trajectory of being incarcerated. We know that many people who are incarcerated come from the foster system. That's not something we talk about enough. There's many people on this call today who I don't know. And I'm really happy about that because I say this every chance I get. The parallels between mass incarceration and the foster system are shows that they're the same system. They're both separated from everyone and everything they know and love. They both eat what they're served. They both have set visit times on set visit days. They both have oversight during the visit. They both change homes and cells regularly. They both use garbage bags or pillowcases to change locations. And in lieu of time, they are both paroled back to either their family or the community with oversight during that parole period. No system built to actually protect children would utilize the blueprint from the prison industrial complex. It is not a pipeline, as we always call it. It is a prerequisite training because they know what the outcome will be. That will be the outcome because they leave these children homeless and in poverty, and their crimes are not malicious, hateful crimes. Their crimes are crimes of survival. And we take that and we use it as a reason to incarcerate. And why is that important? Because the 13th Amendment says the only way to have slaves in this country is through incarceration. We've chosen the Black people who are disproportionately impacted by the system to target them, even though other races are have collateral consequences related to what's happening to us, Black people, but we are the ones with the target on our back. They want slaves in this country, and they have created structures to ensure that they continue to have slaves in this country. Really quick, in the last 5 minutes, there's 2 questions in the chat. Someone took one of the questions out. I'm not sure if someone on the panel answered, but Allison Hunt has a question, and her question is, what are your thoughts on people adopting children through the foster care system, given that the foster system is destructive to families? Well, I think you kind of answered your own question, Miss Allison, because The foster system should not be a place where people go shopping for children if they want to adopt, right? The foster system is a place where you're supposed to be able to support families and ensure that that child gets as much time with their family as possible, with their siblings, and all of the other things, and return that child and maybe become an extension to that child's family. You can play auntie, you can play grandma, you can play friend, you can play godmother, whomever it is that you want to make believe you are to that child, but just be good to that child and support the family in their endeavors. Don't be the person reporting and crying and making a big deal out of little nothings because you ultimately have the goal of keeping someone else's child. Adoption is not the fun thing that we talk about. It may be fun for the family who adopts. And I'm talking especially to white people when they adopt little black boys. It's like me adopting a pit bull. I'm afraid of grown pit bulls. They're cute when they're babies. Little black boys are cute when they are babies. But when they get 13 and their shoe size is twice yours and their height is twice yours and they throw a temper tantrum, you're ready to call the cops on that same child that you claimed you love, and then they're not appreciative of the fact that you gave them a good home. They never wanted your home. They were stolen from their family and you participated in that. With that, I'm going to say our next panel will be next month. In May, I'm going to tell you what the May panel is. It's going to be adoptees because we're going to talk about this adoption thing and being adopted from foster care and families losing rights to their children and children losing rights to their parents, to their siblings, their aunts, their uncles, their extended community, even to their DNA. They lose the right to know who shares their DNA, thus making it more likely in a medical emergency they won't get the help that they need. Is this the America that we want? People are only beginning to see the America that we live in because the things that have been happening to Black people since the time we were brought to this country is now beginning to happen to others. And it's not that I don't have empathy or sympathy for those things happening to anyone. I just want people to understand it was happening to us long before it was happening to you. And the reason it's happening to you is because you didn't believe Martin Luther King when he said any threat of injustice to anyone is a threat of injustice to everyone. With that, I want everyone to have a wonderful day. You will be receiving a recording. Stay blessed.